So you are just outside Seattle. You just moved to a new island.
Yeah, yeah. Me and my wife and my two kids moved out to an island where we could have a little bit more space and prepare and put down some different kinds
For
of
the
roots.
apocalypse.
Yeah,
Prepare for the
yeah,
apocalypse.
yeah. And because I'm all remote. My coaching clients. Some of my coaching clients are in Seattle, but you can do a podcast and do performance coaching and consulting from anywhere. So that's it's nice. I like it. Are you
That's
are
great.
you visiting Venice or are you based out of Venice now?
I'm visiting Venice. I'm currently living in my Tesla is how I would put it. I just Bitcoin went up significantly. I was fortunate enough to inadvertently buy Bitcoin when I tried to get MDMA on the dark web in 2016. And just it didn't work out quite like I had expected, so I held onto the Bitcoin and then bought a Tesla
Really?
instead of the MDMA. That's actually exactly how it worked out.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Uh,
That's
so
awesome.
now I'm living in the Tesla. I was in Miami for when COVID hit. I moved to Miami. I saw that shit on the wall, dude.
Yeah.
I was ahead of all the VCs and all the techies now going there. I was like, Miami's gonna be free. It's gonna be good weather. It's gonna be, there's just more personal freedom there. Feels like a good. I'll go there. And I had a few friends there, and so settled in there. And then Miami's great for about a year, and then it does its time. You kind of I wanted a new place, so I moved to Whitefish in Montana and
Yeah.
spent 5 weeks in an Airbnb just to get a feel for the wilderness. And I'm moving to Utah,
Ah.
to Eden.
Oh.
Uh,
Is it as cool
yeah.
as the name implies?
Oh, it's cooler. Yeah, it's cooler. We're gonna host a retreat there in September as part of this new practitioner training that we're rolling out, and it's in a valley about an hour north of Salt Lake City, 5 minutes away from Powder Mountain, 360
Mm.
views, and like cold plunges and hot springs, and like beautiful vistas, and all the good things. And so a guy who I've recently started working with at Third Wave, who we hired, he lives there with his family, and it's becoming sort of a new hotspot, we could say. So my point being, okay, turn Miami on. Now gonna go to maybe a quieter place in Utah and see what vibes we can bring there.
Beautiful. Ooh, well, that's a really good place to begin. I mean, before we hit the record button, we were talking about how long it's been. It's been 3 years since we spoke last, and the world is a different place. I mean, the world is a different place 2 weeks ago, but you're in a different place. You've got all sorts of cool things that you're working on and developing. This is cool. I like this vibe. This very sort of like chummy conversational. It feels it feels nice to have open conversation. People can kind of lean in and feel like they're a part of it. Um, well, tell me about. I mean, I'm just going to kind of open up the doors for you to kind of to share. There's so many questions I want to ask you about the state of psychedelia and the use of psychedelics, the popularity. I mean, in 3 years, it has just exploded, um, and that's awesome. And also sketchy in a lot of ways too, as we try to figure out like what, how,
A little bit.
right,
There's a little
like
sketchiness.
lots going on. So I would love for you to just like, hey man, hi, what you been up to for the last 3 years since you were last here?
Man, 3 years in my world is like feels like a lifetime sometimes. So when we recorded last, I was living in New York. This was early 2018, April 2018. We were less than 2 weeks away from having our first synthesis retreat.
Mm.
And so about 2 weeks after that, we did our first synthesis retreat, legal, medically supervised psilocybin retreat in the Netherlands. We talked about it through Third Wave, enrolled about 25 people. It was beautiful. And continue to, the team at Third Wave was really solid and strong. And so I was then traveling back and forth between New York and Amsterdam quite a bit, because we did another retreat for Synthesis in June and July after Michael Pollan's book on psychedelics came out, for another, 25 to 30 people. And then we did a retreat in November, 3 retreats. And each one of these was like the first one was 3, the second one was 2, the last one was 3, right? Like consecutive retreats
Mm-hmm.
that we would have. So did a total of 8 retreats for Synthesis throughout 2018. They landed on, we landed on a beautiful church that was built in 1928, that had been renovated into like a modern day wellness center with a sauna and 6 apartments, and a beautiful sanctuary that had been turned into like a common meeting space with couches and lounges and a fireplace and like a beautiful wood table, and then another private space that was like a yoga room where we did the actual experiences. And they then facilitated, we facilitated, I think, over 700 people through those experiences. And then COVID hit, and that the retreat part has been shut down. I think they will launch it soon again, but it's still going to be a little bit of time. So that was adventurous. That was interesting. That was tiring. That was a big thing to go from, I essentially went from, I built my first online business, like teaching English, built an online education school, and then built up that, started Third Wave as a hobby, sold that first business, focused on Third Wave full time. Third Wave and microdosing generated a lot of energy, and that came in through Synthesis. And then I'm still involved with this, but not in the day to day, and stepped back. And in 2019, focused on Third Wave full time, and brought in, a software partner. We started doing a lot more development stuff, and, investing in software, operational processes, systems, vision, investment, right? Going from like this kind of hobby lifestyle businesses to a much bigger vision. And the focus really of the last 2 years has been on Third Wave, what it is, what it's becoming, what the vision for it is. And as this space proliferates in popularity, for good reason, these are incredible tools. It's a great thing that this is happening. It's really important that you have basically actors that have what's best in mind for the space itself, for people generally, for, open source, for healthcare, for well-being. I think that's critical to develop. So
Yeah.
that's where I see Third Wave as this sort of like mycelial ecosystem that is collaborative to everything, right? Like mycelial, yeah, it's super collaborative. It's open. It's free. It's anti-fragile, right? Like, how do you create an organization, a system, a sort of cultural philosophy that embodies the sort of mushroom
Hmm.
mycelialness, right? Even like mushrooms are underground, right? A lot, like,
Mm-hmm.
think of this current space as like psychedelics are healing the toxicity in individuals, right? That's so present in us that we're just becoming more and more aware of, right? It's healing that toxicity that's baked into us, and through that healing, we're healing the world around us, the environment. um you know and it's the very beginning of that, right? Like, this is really nascent and new, but it's essentially the birth of an entirely new evolutionary ecosystem. It's like what Buckminster Fuller said. You don't fight the old model, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete, right?
Yeah.
So if the old model was one of toxicity and extractivism and suffering and pain, disconnection, then how are we creating a new model that is more regenerative, harmonized, interconnected? It's really important that we utilize psychedelics to amplify that philosophy, that perspective,
Hmm.
those values.
Well said. Holy smokes. Yeah, I mean the connection to the fungi, thinking of it as a mycelial network, that often, most of it, everything but the fruiting body, happens under the surface, quietly, coordinated, is such a beautiful metaphor. You know, the there I think of a couple of different, like, going back to where when I first heard about you and in your article in Rolling Stone years ago. You were obviously way ahead of where people were thinking about this, right? Like, I mean, if in retrospect, you know, that was so cutting edge to approach it as a microdosing coach, which is like, and now it's a ubiquitous term, and it has been um, changed and morphed to include all sorts of different substances and practices, controlled and uncontrolled, different statuses, that you know it must be quite a an undertaking physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually to try to stay ahead of the trends, to be able to have the vision for where psychedelics are going. And I wonder about like where your head is now. And I mean, I want you to be able to share anything that you feel comfortable with. I know that there's some stuff that you're working on that you may not ready to talk about, but building physical places where people can go is so essential to this work, right? I mean, we have to have that physical connection. We can't be uh, um, we can't be enjoying the full expression of these compounds without human connection, without a place to go to do this work, right? To grow ourselves. So I know that that's a part of it. The website is so phenomenal. I mean, it is this incredible resource. If you have a question about a compound, how, what, who, where, what does it do, what does it feel like, what doses? I mean, the website is just has just exploded. It's so detailed. So you've got all of these different types of expressions of third wave. What's that like to be to try to be projecting out 5, 10, I don't know, 50, 500 years in this in this work, man? Like, how do you stay grounded?
So the other evening, I watched this phenomenal documentary called "We Are as Gods," and it was a documentary about the life of Stuart Brand, who was the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog, the first man to think about um, looking at the Earth from outer space. He petitioned the government, had a huge movement around it, which is what actually influenced Earth Day. And Stewart is now working on a project that he is trying to de-extinctify the woolly mammoth to help regenerate the tundra steppe lands, the taiga of like Siberia and Northern Europe and North America, right? It's a really fascinating project. And in that, they talk about this concept of time, right? Because Stewart's also a co-founder of the Long Now Foundation, which has installed a 10,000-year clock in the side of a mountain in Texas with the help of Jeff Bezos,
Hmm.
because they're really questioning, like, what is time? Are we looking at things very myopically? The next 10 years, doom, gloom, apocalypse, the world is ending, like it's a lot of fucking fear right now that's coming up. Or are we a little more reasonable? And do we ask, where is this in 100, 500, 1,000, 10,000 years? Right. Um, so how does that relate to psychedelics? How does that relate to third wave? Well, Stuart Brand in the 60s was instrumental in the early psychedelic movement. He was part of the Merry Pranksters with the Grateful Dead. His work with psychedelics helped to then inspire the computer revolution. He was the sort of, Steve Jobs was enamored with Stuart Brand. And Stuart Brand like held court
Hmm.
there with the guys who were inventing the computer revolution, right? And inventing the, Douglas Engelbart, are these all these folks. So that computer revolution was indicative of this desire to live in an interconnected world, right? Because back there it was much more, you had to call the telephone, or you had to, send post, or it was very industrial. And what psychedelics did is they introduced the information age, right? The information revolution. Information wants to be free. And so when we free information, we allow ourselves to live in a more sort of powerful, sovereign, uh, beautiful way, expressive way. So what psychedelics do then is they really help with a sense of I would say deconditioning from the ills of modernity is how I've put it. Deconditioning from the toxicity of industrialism, deconditioning from the lack of awareness, the unawareness of our pain and our suffering, and helping to build essentially what I would term to be a more integral society, right? A society that views itself as interconnected, basically. And if that is true, how does that influence our values, our perspectives, the way we treat people, the decisions that we make, the way that we choose to communicate, right? I think this is sort of this is the opening that psychedelics allow for. Now, psychedelics are catalytic in that they can put you into that perspective, can put you into that mind's eye, that third eye of the mystical experience. And they don't necessarily guarantee enlightenment or guarantee, whatever else it might be. There's a lot of psychopathy that come up as a result of psychedelics. There are a lot of folks that can't do psychedelics. But generally the trend is definitely towards like people when they do psychedelics, they learn that the external space, the external world is largely illusory, and that basically there's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to dying because death is an illusion as a result of that, right? And so there's a really like, oh, you can just relax into life a little bit more because it opens up for a place of courage. But this isn't, some folks take that as a messiah complex. Some folks take that as, it's a power thing. So there are definitely, we all have darkness and shadow, and some people's is a lot more disgusting than others. So I think it's really good to be having that level of discernment, that awareness as you're choosing, for example, which providers to work with. Because if you're choosing to put yourself in this vulnerable and suggestive state, then you want to be in the graces of someone who can care for you, who can listen for you, who can guide you. And this is the question, the core question that we're asking with Third Wave then is, through our platform, how do we help enable that level of trustworthiness between providers, practitioners, and those who want to work with psychedelics? And then how do we just take care of, because a lot of this is about the skill of working with psychedelics. So how do we just teach that as think of it as basic psychedelic literacy, just like we all learn like our basic financial literacy. We learn how to pay taxes. We learn how to check our bank accounts. We learn how to get a job. There's a lot of people that could go a long way with getting basic psychedelic literacy, right? So let's help to build that through Third Wave as a platform, which we've already done. We already have a good start on, I would say, and it's continuing to grow and evolve. And then let's roll. So the next project that we're rolling out soon, as it relates to this, is this directory, which is then a listing of providers, retreat centers, clinics, therapists, and coaches, where you can find, someone, if you want to do this work, you can find someone to do it with, essentially. And so with that, we're rolling out a certification program, right? So there's a lot of coaches then that can hold space for psychedelic experiences, that can coach people through this. And a lot of the programs so far are focusing explicitly on clinical outcomes. Depression, addiction, anxiety, alcoholism, PTSD, and these are necessary and important. And it's like the first round of what psychedelics will do. But in the spirit of being a little forward thinking, we're focusing on non-clinical outcomes. So how do psychedelics help with flow, creativity, leadership, optimal wellness, chronic, it could be things like chronic disease or chronic inflammation, right? That can also be healed through this, and bringing together a very diverse and incredible faculty to essentially teach that. And then not necessarily doing it for folks who don't have a coaching practice and want to become a coach, not so much, but for those who already have established coaching practices and recognize psychedelics as what I would call a potent tool for behavioral change, right? And as we know, as both of us are coaches, when you're working with clients, you want to help them accelerate or help them accelerate behavioral change. You want it to feel easy. You want it to go smoothly. You want to hold them when it's difficult, but also, inspire them and help them understand their goals and objectives. And psychedelics, if used with clients in a great way, can catalyze
Mm.
incredible change and transformation in an accelerated window. And I think there's likely, from my humble perspective, nothing, or maybe biased perspective is a way of putting it, there's probably nothing more valuable as a tool in your toolkit to really learn how to work with well, because of the way that it can accelerate change. And if you don't, it's kind of like playing with fire a little bit, because if you don't learn how to use it well, it can potentially cause more
Mm.
harm than good.
Mm.
So you got to, it's a little bit like Mickey in Fantasia with the wizards, mops and buckets. If you're going to be using the magic, you got to learn how to work with it first,
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. So as I zoom out and think about, okay, what's Paul really focused on now? It's allowing, empowering, educating individuals who have their own networks, who have their own connections with different people to really understand and cultivate practices for best practices for use to really help people transform in their coaching practice.
And a lot of the way that I love to teach is experiential.
Got to.
In other
Yeah.
words, the coaching is you going through this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we'll teach theory. There's classes, there's Q&A, there's, it's definitely, yeah, it's integrative. So there's intellectual components, certainly, but like this is also very experiential. This is asking you to commit to the changes and shifts yourself, and teaching through that lens, as well as these are the menu of options, if you will, if you're going to work with these tools. And the way that I look at psychedelics as a skill is there's three core components to consider, which is macrodoses, microdoses, and then supporting modalities: meditation, breath work, yoga, neurofeedback, float tanks, anything that helps you with cultivating presence, awareness, letting go of stress, et cetera, et cetera. So learning how to work with a client as it relates to those three things, there's actually there's a relationship there, there's a harmony there, there is a way of harmonizing those components to be optimal for the client that someone might be working with, because you don't want to, for example, start with the wrong type of medicine. You don't want to give too much of that medicine the first
Mm-hmm.
time. And you also don't want to um, do it too often, right? Like a macrodose is good once. Usually the way that I work with clients is we'll do 2 to 3 experiences over 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Higher dose as like an initiation and opening, right? This is based on the MAPS trials. MAPS, for their MDMA for PTSD trials, they do 3 experiences in 12 weeks, 3 experiences in 3 months, right? So spread it out a little bit more. Some of it may be front loaded on the front end to catalyze significant change. And then you want to sure people feel held and supported to integrate these new behaviors, like a meditation or journaling or fasting or whatever you decide is optimal for the client that you're working with. And what I found in my work with clients is that most folks are best starting with MDMA or psilocybin, and most folks are best starting with MDMA.
Mm.
Has been my perspective, because I mean it's very easy to work with. It's very healing. It's very just loving, and it's a great initial opener for something like psilocybin, because once you start to fuck with psychedelics, that is, MDMA is a different type of thing. MDMA helps with what I would say cultivating the soil, but the psychedelic is the seed that you plant.
Mm.
It's the new self that you're planting, right? And psilocybin is catalytic for that reason, and it needs to be eased into for a lot of folks. So how do we, based on the client's needs, based on the outcomes, based on are they more from a leadership perspective, are they more from an optimal wellness, a peak performance, whatever it is, right? Like life coaching even, right? This can be very useful for life coaching. what are the client's objectives? What are their pasts? What questions are you asking them in the onboarding process
Mm-hmm.
to ensure you have a full scope of who it is that you're working with? What's their psyche? What's their emotional history? All of these questions are really important. And then based on that, how can you help them piece together a more cohesive, interconnected sense of self? And that's I think it's difficult just because it's so new, but it doesn't need to be. In other words, the skill to work with it is very intuitive to develop, and it's a lot about listening, right? Just learning how to listen.
Right.
I find that to be what I come back to again and again is the value of that.
Yeah. the the importance of this work, this new thrust of educating people on how to do this in a responsible way, is so important now because there are lots of folks out there who are have tried have some experience with psychedelics and that have had profound experiences that have helped them change their lives. And those folks, because they're excited about the potential of these compounds, because they have experienced these changes for themselves, um, they feel a sense of purpose. They feel a sense of duty to pass that knowledge along, to help light other people up, to help them learn and grow. And a lot of those people maybe shouldn't be running co-pilot on these programs. They don't have any coaching background. They don't have any coaching experience. They're wonderful people. They're warm people. They're beautiful and thoughtful, and they are great listeners, but they don't understand the importance of like neutrality within an experience. They don't know how to respond when someone is having a hard time. And it's this like, petting the bunny too much, too tightly, and squeezing the shit out of that bunny when you're holding space for someone who's going through this experience. You want to love them and help them grow and have the same experience, or a beneficial experience for themselves with these psychedelics, but they have no tools. They've got no context. They don't know. They don't have the background. They didn't ask the right questions. Now, of course, as I look back in my history of my experiences with psychedelics, in addition to the 120-hour life coaching certification that I went through, it's you got to do the work. You've got to go through these experiences a number of times. You've got to understand how you respond, how you react when things get weird, when your body doesn't work the way that you expect it to, when you go into a dark place, when you begin to loop, and that is so important. I see you, I feel you, I hear you. It is so important to empower other people to have tools, have practices. You can't just it's fairly irresponsible to walk around and saying, "Oh, I'm a psychedelic practitioner and I can help you grow with these mushrooms, and so here you go, here we go. We're going to do this thing. I've got a setup, and you really don't have any tools to help people. You don't have the context, and you don't have the background. You know, in my life coaching certification, like I shed some tears. Like I did the actual practices. I did the tools that I now coach around. I did these exercises, and I had firsthand experience with them, and I know how to kind of navigate through those waters. And so the situation we're in now, where everybody wants to try it, everybody is interested in the what there is to learn from these compounds, but they're just kind of the blind leading the blind a little bit, and that does make me nervous. Before we turned the microphones on, I was like, "Hey, we're in a different place than we were 3 years ago, Paul. Like this is a new psychedelic world, bro. You're deep in the third wave now." And it's also a little sketchy. It's fucking exciting and sketchy because there's a lot of folks out there that have great intentions but don't have the skills and the tools to help. So I, for one, think that this focus for you, is so important. So, geez.
Well, and that's why I keep talking about microdosing. I mean, this is the core of what you're getting at, because we haven't necessarily trained a culture on the skills that holding space for high dose psychedelic experiences would require. It's a whole new perspective. It's a whole new way of coexisting with the world. So the reason microdosing, I think, carries so much weight is it really helps people to experience it without needing to necessarily go and have that super high dose experience right away. And I think that's valuable as more and more people hear about it, because if the benefits still turn out to be significant, and based on a lot of based on a lot of what we've seen, they are quite significant. Then it can be a useful tool until we become a bit more sort of trained. We have more and more people who can actually hold the space. But that's only, like, think of it this way, that's only going to be a few years. There's several good programs popping up, several great trainers. Synthesis just rolled out a 18-month program, 12 months of training, and then a 6-month sort of internship that they enrolled like 100, more than 100 people in. And CIS has theirs, and I know another friend who's training like 500 to 600, and he's great and has put together incredible faculty. So I think this will happen rapidly to some degree, which is the obviously upside to working with psychedelics. Is, like we've talked about, they accelerate behavioral change. That's the huge plus to them. So psychedelics will help in this adaptive phase. And there is a lot of sort of hoopla right now because of all the financing that's coming into the space and the stock market. And so we're just seeing more and more coverage from a financial perspective. But I can tell you, as someone who actually helps, like, who does this for real people and doesn't just talk about how we're going to do it in 5 or 7 years for real people, which, I mean, that's a path, right? It's a biotech route. I like to be, as practical and on the ground innovative as possible. We're definitely seeing an uptick in interest, and we haven't quite breached the sort of early. We've breached now the pioneer phase, but I don't think we've breached the early adopter phase at this point. But I think we'll within the next 5 to 7 to 10 years, we will start to breach that, and it will become fairly ubiquitous in the next, I would say, 7 to 10 years. In most places, like working with these different compounds, these different types of molecules, they're just going to show greater efficacy, greater safety, than typical, pharmaceutical medications. And so my sense is pharmaceutical corporations will divest from typical conventional psychiatric medications and replace them with these psychedelic compounds or these new psychedelic molecules that are being developed. And instead we'll focus more of their efforts on gene therapy and vaccinations, because that's going to become more and more of a thing with these viruses that will continue to emerge as we figure out how do we vaccinate ourselves to everything ever made, which I don't think is wise, because that will just create a massive immunity outbreak and then we'll all be fucked. But I'm not a public health expert, so please take
Well,
my
we could
opinion with a
we
single
could
grain,
really easily
grain,
we could
grain
really
of salt.
really easily go down that path at night.
We won't. But I just wanted to say.
I've learned my lesson. I've done, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, um, I'm curious about the marriage between the clinical studies and applications, the well researched, well documented sort of applications of a psychedelic experience versus a um, non clinical, non um, white coat lab style sort of experience. And for me, I'm really torn here because I cannot imagine getting anywhere near the sort of benefit that I've experienced using psychedelics, sitting in a doctor's office, listening to somebody's music that they picked out with a blindfold on. And I'm curious about how you are thinking about marrying the, you talked about the MDMA study with PTSD, like, groundbreaking. Like, how do therapists tie into this? Can you go outside in barefoot and have that be part of your experience as well? When you think about putting together these sorts of best practices, how challenging is that to honor the clinical science and research, but also honoring the sort of primacy of finding something, eating it, and enjoying nature a little bit. You see where I'm going with that?
Oh yeah, I see where you're going with that. So part of it is reimagining clinical spaces to be integrative, right? To be rewild, to have nature as part of an integral element of those clinical spaces. I think these new churches that will start to pop up that are a synthesis of science and spirituality, which will essentially be these new sort of community spaces where there's meditation and breath work and yoga and a sauna and a cold plunge. And, you get to work with psychedelic medicine there. They'll be in beautiful outdoor locations. I think those are the future of clinical spaces. And then they will have specific slots where you'll come out to get treated for PTSD or depression or addiction. And that's where you go to have that therapeutic experience. So I think, and that will sort of coincide with also the greening of cities. So I sense that, more and more clinics are going to look to roll out really just like even field trip. They've rolled out these
Mm,
ketamine assisted psychotherapy clinics and they're stunning. They're beautiful. So more attention will be paid, there will be more attention paid to aesthetic and vibe
mm,
than the typical sort of white lab coat clinical space is my sense. That I think, and that's the future that synthesis is holding. Looking at with Oregon legalizing psilocybin therapy, what does it look like to open a retreat space there
mm-hmm,
potentially? And then being able to host both clinical and non-clinical work out of that center on a beautiful retreat center, basically retreat outdoor location, right? So I think that they will pioneer that and likely expand on that, and that's how I sense we've seen a significant die off and lack of interest in traditional mainstream religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, because it doesn't vibe with sort of our scientific materialist reduction kind of framework. And I think what psychedelics will help to do is re-inspire a birth of something that's beyond the atheist, materialist
mm,
perspective. And I think that will that will influence these new religions, right? Ken Wilber wrote a fantastic book called The Religions of Tomorrow, and what he talked about in that was like how when the printing press was invented in 1451, it made literacy on a widespread scale feasible, possible, and then the Enlightenment occurred because of that,
mm,
because you had the top 10% of the population, right? It wasn't everyone that became literate, but the top 10% of the population became literate, could read, could learn to think, started going to university. And then all of a sudden it ushered in this massive period of growth, which led to the Industrial Revolution and incredible abundance for many of us who are even listening to this. So, what psychedelics are doing is they're doing a similar thing where they're helping with awakening, right? So, it's a philosophical value that is transcendent to reading, right? Reading is more, I would say, basic, so to say, but we're transcending beyond that, beyond the rational mind, back into the mystery and learning how to be comfortable in that space of uncertainty. Um, and then building new systems, these systems of interconnectedness based on these awakening things. And that's where I go, like, say, not everyone needs to do psychedelics. Not everyone needs to have a mystical experience. Not everyone needs to wake up, right? There will always be sheep. That's just human nature. But what we do need is we need sort of the people who are responsible for creating the systems that the sheep will live in to be awakened. And like Wilbur talked about with literacy and the Enlightenment, right? It was only top 10%. We just need 10% of folks to really wake up in a significant way.
mm-hmm,
And I don't even think it needs to necessarily be that's global population. It could be like, think of it 10% of North America, which would be 35 million people.
mm,
In a way, we're almost there. We're very close to that.
right.
We're just learning how to integrate it, right? Because of the second wave, there were 30 million people who have done LSD already. Now we're like, the second wave was the opening, it was the catalyst. Now with this third wave, this is the integration.
Yeah.
This is where we actually integrate that altered state of consciousness into our societal systems to create regenerative um, infrastructure that we exist with and through and within, rather than that exists for
Hmm.
us, right? So there's more of a harmony, there's more of a togetherness with that.
Hmm. Yeah, and those folks who have opted into that awakening, who have sought it out, who are asking big questions and doing the work to get greater perspective on themselves and their roles in reality. When you get to that, what did you say, 30 million? Is that what was that was or 300 million? Yeah.
35, 40 million. We could even say 50 million if we want to include Europe, maybe 100 million if we're including Europe,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
those 100 million are also, if it were a Venn diagram, they also probably cross over as leaders. They also probably cross over as visionaries with great ideas, the energy and enthusiasm to push the thing forward. And so it's as that grows, again using that mycelial metaphor, that grows everywhere. It touches families, it touches institutions, it touches the fabric of the way that that commerce works and governments work. I did some plant medicine work a couple of weekends ago and met a couple of vets who this was their first real psychedelic experience in plant medicine ceremony, and they all had the same. There was four of them. They all said the same thing. Like, this is far and away, bar none, the most important work that I've done since being out of the military. Like, I'm ready now to make some of these changes. I don't have all the answers, but what I now know about myself after 3 nights is more than I've ever known before in my life. Why can't this be done at scale everywhere? They're failing us at the VA. They're failing us in these institutions that are supposed to support us, and it just so happens that those types of guys that are involved in doing this type of work are also the guys that are going to be change makers, that are going to go out and make major influences in the world. I mean, if you just took that population alone, that's the veteran population, who obviously have been part of the PTSD studies with MDMA. Like, my goodness, just imagine how quickly things would change, policies would change, family dynamics would change, how quickly that would change if they had access to this type of work.
And we had the system available and the training available and the education available to guide people through that. And then the vision of how does that shift and change our external world so that we don't live in such a sort of depressive, melancholic state. Because I think that's the challenge and difficulty for a lot of folks right now. Like, there's just, life for some is great, but it kind of sucks for a lot of people. And I suppose that's how it's always been. So this is partly perspective. But there also seems to be a way that this is just not working, particularly in a post-COVID era.
Mm.
So we really have to start to imagine what are the new spaces. And, I'm really interested in the folks who are like buying property in Costa Rica or islands in off of Canada or chateaus in, old chateaus in France, buying land and reimagining what can be done with that
Yeah.
land with, a partner or a group of friends or a community, whatever it is. And especially with remote work and everything going online and the advent of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, there's this opportunity, this availability for networked states to start to pop up, where no longer are you tied together by geographic location, but you are more importantly tied together by common purpose and mission. And, so I think that's what businesses are becoming. And so if you hold a vision of what you want your business to be, how you want it to land, think of it as a community, think of it as a networked state, think of it as not something that people are doing to make money, because money will soon become irrelevant, is
Mm.
my
Mm.
sense. But and sooner, much sooner than people think. At least the way that we know it. Money will always be relevant, but like fiat
Right.
currency and it'll just be way different very soon. So I think instead, focus on what's the mission that you want to create. What do you want to bring into the world? How does your mission, how is it transvisual? How does it align with the missions of other people? How do you tap into that sort of soul that we all, want to uncover and bring to the world, and tie that into building something that's really beautiful and helpful and sustainable. I think that is the sort of new work. That's the way that people will um, interact with reality, so to say, is everything becomes integrated. They live with the people that they also sometimes work with, right? And those people are working on a common mission. And that doesn't mean it's a commune in Arkansas in 1860 and you can never leave. What that might mean, though, is like you mutually own a chateau in France, a monastery in Japan, a tree house in Costa Rica, an island off British Columbia,
Ooh.
and it's part of this network state that you're building. And then you just have your team offsites there. People can live there when they want. It's open, it's spacious, it's dope as fuck.
Mhm.
Like that I think is the future of work, of existing, is giving people those options in a way, and building and creating that for them. And then it'll be easy to, how do you figure out food, and like, can you grow your own stuff on that land? We'll have technology available that'll make it easier and easier to grow really nutritious food for ourselves. We'll have self-driving cars, and planes and drones, and we're going to Mars. I think there's a lot of innovation to be optimistic about in the next 10 to 20
Mhm.
years. And I mentioned this earlier, I touched on this earlier, but it's also, I think, important to think of time as something of the industrial era. And with the advent of psychedelics in the 60s, we learned to reevaluate time to be not so linear, if you will. Industrialism needed time to be linear because we needed to have a clock that people punched out at. We needed a 9 to 5. We needed to keep track of things and pay people by the hour and measure things in a very linear fashion for the success of capitalism. But as we move into a post-capital world, a post-material world, it's critical that we have a clear sense of how, what role information will play in that, and what role staying, connected will play in that, and the role that general, integrated systems will play in that. So it's an exciting, I think it's an exciting future. Like I said, it will come much quicker than people think because time is
Mhm.
circular, as we know, and we're sort of just living in an eternal recurrence, is my perspective, and then and like, it just, what we're coming into is what we've always have come into, what we've always been meaning to come into,
Yeah.
which is that singularity, essentially.
What stands in the way of that process? And when I say that process, I mean true synthesis and harmony within these changing structures, these changing paradigms of currency, of togetherness. Like, what in your mind are some of the major obstacles in the getting in the way of the vision that you've laid out?
Well, one is, don't focus on fixing the problem. So don't focus on what the don't focus on yeah, don't focus on what are the problems that need to be fixed, right? Instead, focus on what's the solution that we want to
Back to
create.
the
So there's this,
Bucky Fuller example.
back to the Bucky Fuller quote. Exactly. Yeah. And there's this fantastic book called The Path of Least Resistance by Robert Fritz. And it's a phenomenal book. I would highly recommend everyone read it. And in that book, Fritz talks about the importance of focusing on the outcome and being in a creative orientation, right? When we get stuck in a reactive responsive orientation, it's like we're being rubber banded, right? So if there are problems that arise through that creative orientation, in other words, this is what we want to create, then they will naturally resolve themselves on the way to that path, because you remain clear on the outcome, you revisit that outcome, you sort of see the mountaintop for what it is, and then we come back down and we do the work, and we make the secondary choices, but our primary choice is always to that mountaintop, depending on the mountaintop, of course. And I think, what psychedelics will help us do is to focus on vision and creative solutions. And then as problems arise, We simply need to adapt to that, right, because of what we're building. It's anti-fragile, it's robust, it's resilient, right? It wants disruption, it
Mm.
wants things to go wrong, because it goes like mushrooms, it adapts and it learns and it grows. So I think the things that will potentially go wrong will be the over pharmaceuticalization, the over medicalization, the biomedicalization of psychedelic substances. It's important to emphasize that psychedelics are not pharmaceuticals, just like solar is not gas. They both serve a common goal, but gas and oil are fossil fuels, and solar is regenerative. Pharmaceuticals are like the fossil fuels of medicine. They are going out of whatever, they're going to go extinct to some degree, the conventional psychiatric medications that we know, and they will replace more and more by plant medicine, by psychedelics, by herbs, by a more sort of herbalist, plant-based way of being, because it's simply healthier
Mm-hmm.
for you. And I think incentives are going, again, as we step into a post-material world, the incentives are transitioning from what I would call from financial wealth to experiential or even existential wealth, right? So if the orientation is towards, let's say, existential wealth, then you will naturally, in that evolution of human development, we will naturally choose incentives that align with that. And that is to exist and thrive in existing requires being discerning about your well-being and how you take care of yourself, and the sleep that you get, and the sun that you get, and the food that you put in your body, right? That is core to existential wealth. And so my understanding is people will orient, some of us, not all of us, the 10%, so to say,
Mm.
will orient towards that, and then help build, the new, again, and then build anti-fragile adaptive systems that respond to other issues and challenges and things that may arise. I think to get a bit more practical and grounded, you also have issues with providers, unlicensed providers who have a history of, things that related to sexual, whatever, sex and psychedelics don't typically mix. So it's good to be mindful and aware of provider quality. I think it's also important to be mindful of spiritual bypass. That's why I talked about before the need to start with something like MDMA and do deep trauma work before getting into psilocybin. There's a lot of spiritual bypassing. People just go into like 5-MeO DMT and then think they're enlightened, and they don't realize they have this stinking shadow that is projecting all over the place that they have no awareness of.
Mm.
Right. So I think it's good to first do a lot of inner work with these tools and substances in a significant way. I've been working with psychedelics for about 11 years now, and I've always done them by and large, not necessarily in a therapeutic context, sometimes in a therapeutic context, but always in an intentional
Mm-hmm.
context, right? That's always been sort of my way of doing it. I mean, I've dropped acid a couple times at a party, sure, but that's more the rare situation than the common thing. So spiritual bypassing, it's not for everyone. So there are some people. So psychedelics are really great at addressing rigidity, right? Interrupting rigidity. Some would call that interruption of the default mode
Mm-hmm.
network. So that's why it's so helpful at treating addiction and alcoholism and depression and anxiety. Is it disrupts that rigidity? Fantastic, great. What it's not, it introduces more entropy and more chaos into the system. It introduces openness, right? But if you're schizophrenic, or if that veil's already been opened, or if you're very sensitive, like, it's really best to be mindful of how much you take of these and who you take them with and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. And then I think other challenges just come from within the psychedelic space itself. There is, I would say, it's becoming bigger, which I appreciate, but still in some of the, I would say, more subculture, there's a lot of victimhood. There's a lot of what I would call drama and
Mm.
cattiness, and a lot of focus on things that just don't really serve the greater good and the vision, and I think are more harmful than good. And I think that's not only true of the subculture. I also think that is true of the biotech and overly medicalized plays that are coming into the space, in that there's a lot of attempts at patenting and what I would call rent seeking. In other words, trying to quote unquote patent something that's is really not an innovation whatsoever. You're just patenting a molecule that already exists,
Hmm.
and your strategy is no better than like a nonprofit strategy, for example. And mushrooms grow everywhere anyway. So I think I'm not anti synthesis. I think synthetic molecules are valuable and great. I just think the overemphasis on how necessary they are plays back into the industrial FDA approval model. And as we've talked about this entire conversation, everything we're building with psychedelics is to go beyond that model, beyond the FDA approval pharmaceutical model, and beyond sort of the healthcare system that we have out now into something that is radically different and more cohesive, more inclusive, more integrative, all those sorts of
Hmm.
things.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great examples. Those are certainly things that you have to consider for what comes next. Variables in the process of evolution. Um, One thing that I sort of wonder about is as more and more interest from more and more institutions comes into the psychedelic space. This like you spoke to like with the patenting thing. That was one of the questions I was going to ask you. Is you can say, hey, I want to patent this because I want to protect it. We've heard that before, and I want to be involved because I want to do this the right way. I mean well. I have great intentions in protecting this so that it doesn't get into the wrong hands, or so that it doesn't get bastardized or abused or misused. And I think that sentiment makes sense. And also, I have experienced, and I know you have too, is people who have had deep experiences, who are involved in psychedelics or in communities or organizations in this work. I think there is a tendency to be like, hey, I've got all the answers, I got it all figured out. Like I've thought about this a lot. I got this figured out. Just let me kind of do my thing because I'm gonna make it work. And so I wonder about like the full stack process of how's it grown, how's it studied, how's it applied, how's it researched, what are the applications of it. Like there's aims to really control that whole entire process. And I wonder what your those are kind of two questions: is the patenting thing, how you assume that's going to evolve, and also the need or want or the compulsion to try to control the entire process of cultivation to testing to publishing and the actual practitionership, not to mention like sort of the follow through of the integration after the experience. Those are kind of two different things, but I want your thoughts.
Yeah, so my sense is patents, just like horse buggies, are a thing of the past, and they're not really going to come back in a significant way. It's harder and harder to protect patents, and things are becoming more open source. Information wants to be free, after all. So my sense is, particularly as it relates to psychedelics, that the patent model is great for pharmaceuticals. It doesn't really work as well for psychedelics. I think there will be money in it, but I don't think it will be near as lucrative as people anticipate. I think what's more lucrative is, as we were talking about earlier, these networked ecosystems, these communities, this ability to help. What I would say the second part of that is to create that for folks in a really beautiful, held, supported way. So I think the second element of what you asked about, the first element, I mean, there will be patents on certain things. There will be molecules. I don't think they'll be that widely used, and I think patents are a thing of the past. With the second thing, that depends on the company, right? There are some behemoth companies that do want to own, obviously, end to end, which makes total sense from a business sort of vertical integrated perspective. My sense is how business is going is we've sort of reached, and I'm not totally convinced of this perspective, but it's my sense that we've reached peak centralization, and there will be more and more sort of fractaling of income and resources. As, for example, something like even what Tesla is building is they're building redistributed energy.
Mm.
So you'll be able to soon charge other people for just having solar panels and redistribute energy. You'll be able to, self-drive your car, will go around, will make money for you. Like there's just going to be more ways to like provide and receive value that keep us in a very, like I said, most of our basic needs are covered. And so I think from that perspective and view, we just look to focus on um, new ways of expressing ourselves. new art forms, new creations, new whatever else it might be, and we're all becoming sort of artists and creators.
Hmm.
And so, what does that mean for the specifics of your question? There will probably be 50 to 100 companies who do that for folks in the psychedelic space, and they'll all have their sort of different methodology and different way of doing it. And there will be some that are bigger than others, but I think it'll be a very sort of fractalized space. It's going to be more difficult in psychedelics. Again, this is just my sense, to build a massive corporation, because of the power of the sort of underground decentralized network, and decentralization is in many ways antithetical
Hmm.
to corporations. It's more aligned with these network states that we've been talking about.
Hmm. So again, back to the Bucky quote is the systems will get so good, so agile, so mutually beneficial, so supported within these networks of different people from all over the world who are doing these things. It's not that the old guard, the old process, the old institutions that are trying to hold on to the old way of doing things are just going to sort of like, well, that just doesn't work anymore. Like we've moved past that. The the fact that um, charismatic, influential, highly networked people talking to other charismatic, intellectual, smart, visionary type of people, helping other people all across the world create these new systems. That's it's where it's headed anyway, and you're suggesting that it's coming real fast. I love that.
Well, I think it has to. There's sort of we're on a bit of a time crunch, folks. Let's get our shit together. Let's get in the van. We got 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's one of those situations where humanity has brought itself to this precipice, but ultimately I believe in our adaptive ability, and just like totally new, like imagine going through the Middle Ages, right? We're kind of going through the Middle Ages right now, a little bit,
Hmm.
and it's going to be much quicker than it was before, because time again is not linear. Time is circular, so it'll go much quicker in sort of these days, years, months time framing that we have, and that's because it's necessary. And I think we'll see a shrink, we'll see a contraction. I think viruses are going to kill tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, potentially even billions. But I don't think we'll go extinct. I think there will be a good chunk of us that survive, and it will be up to us to build in these new systems and make them as regenerative and holistic as possible. But we didn't really get into the dark side so much today. But I definitely think there will be massive, widespread suffering for the next 10 to 20 years. Right? It's not. This isn't going to be like fucking walk in the park, right? Like any shedding process, any process of significant transformation comes with some rocky times at sea, and I think we're starting to get into that
Hmm.
a little bit. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope all things go well, and I'm holding the vision that all things will go well, and that there won't be you know more and more viruses and other things like super flus or whatever it is. It just feels like we're a little fragile right now, and these institutions of industrialism in particular are fragile, and attempting to replicate them with something like psychedelics will fail
Hmm.
without a doubt. It's just a matter of time and what infrastructure is built with it that helps to bring in this new regenerative system. But my bet is that most of these not for profit, most of these public market plays will either shift and transform into something different, or it's just I don't think they have legs, frankly.
Yeah, well, we're beginning to see that the fragility that we are experiencing in this generation that we didn't have 2 generations ago is because of the systems that promote lifestyles that are unhealthy, food choices that are unhealthy, overexposure to media, staying inside, not getting love and support from a tribal standpoint. So we're beginning to see now this sort of postmodernist expression of what the fuck happens when people eat McDonald's 4 times a week. Like, what the fuck happens when people, watch 7 hours of screens a day and sit and work 50 hours a week for not enough money. Like, what happens? What's the result? Well, the result is people are less resilient. The result is people are closed off to reinventing new structures, to reinventing themselves. Like it just this we're seeing it right now unfold. You know, I agree. I think that we're in this fulcrum point where this shift is happening. It's happening in every industry all across the world, in every country, and in every soul. Right? We're all like, "What the fuck is going on? What are we supposed to do?" And it just so happens that some of the answers include, well, slow down, go outside, get your feet dirty, unplug, relax, space out. That seems to help. and the amplification of that shift in lifestyle, the amplification of the the taking one's ownership. And again, this is a drum I've been beating for years and years and years, from starting float centers to coaching to the podcast, is like, we have to own our own health and well-being. We cannot expect daddy to come in and make us healthy and happy. We cannot expect some institution to just come in and like, hey, we're going to make you right. We're going to make you healthy. Don't worry. We got you covered. It just doesn't happen that way. It just doesn't exist. And they're also not going to expand your consciousness and help you create a vision for yourself. Like, you have to do that work yourself. And I think we're growing up to a certain extent. We're in this point where we have to grow up. And, these psychedelic compounds are in my experience, and I know yours, are the most important tools for doing that.
They are.
Yeah.
They're incredibly important.
Well, this has been great. I know you're a busy guy. I don't want to take up any more of your time. There's lots of different other sort of roads we could have gone down. What would you like people to do? Where can they find you? Where can they learn more about the training that you're doing? Like, where should you direct people?
So if people want to learn more about the training, that's, I think, thethirdwave.co/coaching-certification. You can also send our team an email, support@thethirdwave.co. If you're a coach who wants to become, more skilled at working with psychedelics. And that will include an in-person retreat in Eden, Utah, September 9th through 12th, which will be really dope. So that's a good first place. And then thethirdwave.co for the website, the psychedelic education, and paulaustin.co if you just want to learn more about a little bit about my background and history and whatnot.
What's your favorite social media platform? Where are you most active?
Twitter as of late, Instagram as well. Paul Austin 3W on both platforms.
Cool. Okay, real quickly, the fill in the blank question that I ask every single one of my guests. You can elaborate as much or as little as you like, and this can be based on anything that any of your experience, but please fill in the blank. Everyone would benefit from knowing.
One sec. Everyone would benefit from knowing that psychedelic use is a critical skill to heal trauma and optimize well-being.
Well said. I love that. Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Paul Austin, thank you so much for joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thanks, Sean. This is fun. This is a lot of fun. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on intentional and responsible psychedelic use.